Have you ever lain awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone who once made you feel like home can now act like you were a stranger? How can a person simply vanish? No final conversation, no honest goodbye, just emptiness. And that emptiness is deafening. It makes you unravel from the inside. Was any of it genuine? Did they truly feel anything? Or were you simply there at the right time? When you love someone who runs from closeness, the ending hits differently. It feels colder, almost calculated. One moment you are building something together, the next they are withdrawn, composed, unaffected, as though nothing inside them shattered. And that is the wound that never gets talked about enough. Not the separation itself, but how effortless they make it appear. You loop through every memory, the laughter, the midnight conversations, the way their eyes softened when they looked at you. And now it all feels like something you invented. But here is what the world rarely explains. People who avoid intimacy do not respond the way you respond. They are built for self-protection, not emotional expression. Their nervous system was conditioned long before you arrived, conditioned to believe that getting close is unsafe, that relying on another person is dangerous, that surrendering to deep feeling means surrendering control. So when love grows heavier, when emotions deepen, when vulnerability begins pressing against the door, something inside them triggers, not because you were overwhelming, but because emotional closeness feels like a threat to their survival. When things fall apart, you absorb the pain instantly. Your chest tightens, your mind races, your whole body feels the absence. But the avoidant, they feel something else first. Relief. Relief from the emotional weight. Relief from the depth of feeling. Relief from the exposure that comes with being truly known. And when you witness that relief, it destroys you. It feels like erasure. It feels like you never registered. It feels like they stepped away without a single scratch. But what you are watching is not freedom, it is armor. Psychological research tells us something crucial about emotional suppression. When a person has spent years training themselves to shut off feeling, the brain protects them by deferring pain. The system numbs itself, it redirects attention, it detaches, and from the outside, it looks like peace. But numb is not healed. Quiet is not okay. Absence is not indifference. Right now, you may be in the most brutal stretch of this, the stretch where your heart is bleeding and they look untouched, the stretch where you are questioning whether you ever mattered, while they carry on as if the chapter never existed, the stretch where every impulse tells you to reach out because you are starving for proof that the connection was real. That impulse is not weakness. Your mind is searching for resolution. It is searching for confirmation. It needs something solid to hold on to. That is how human bonding works. When we attach to someone, our nervous system begins to associate that person with safety. Losing them does not feel like loss. It feels like suffocation. But here is the truth. Most people are afraid to speak plainly. The avoidant is not at peace. They are occupied. And those are entirely different things. Occupation can disguise itself as recovery. They pour themselves into deadlines. They surround themselves with people. They chase stimulation with both hands. They may even begin something new, anything that prevents them from sitting alone with their own silence, because silence is threatening for someone who has built their life around avoiding emotion. Silence demands honesty. Honesty awakens feeling. Feeling dismantles control, and control is the only language they trust. Avoidants are extraordinarily skilled at persuading themselves they have moved past something. They construct an internal narrative. It was not compatible. It became too intense. I simply needed room. And for a period, that narrative holds together like scaffolding. But the body carries every connection it has ever made. The mind can deny, the ego can rationalize. But attachment carves pathways, and pathways do not dissolve because someone decided to move forward. You are standing in the phase that feels profoundly unjust. You are raw. They look polished. You are doing the grief work. They appear weightless. But this phase does not last forever. Silence deceives. It can feed the story your fear is whispering, that you were disposable, that you were not sufficient, that nothing you gave left any trace behind. But connection always leaves a trace. And here is what needs to land deeply. The avoidance withdrawal is not evidence that you were unimportant. It is evidence that they are fleeing discomfort, fleeing exposure, fleeing the kind of depth you carried into their world. You challenged something in them. You opened rooms inside them they had kept locked. They were not prepared to enter those rooms. You made them feel things beyond their ability to manage. And for someone whose entire foundation is built on managing, that is overwhelming. So they pull back. And when they pull back, it looks like your defeat. But it is not. You are simply further along in the emotional timeline. You are processing now. They will process later. And if you stay with this, you will come to understand exactly when that moment arrives. The moment when the avoidant can no longer outrun what they left behind. When the quiet becomes unbearable. When distraction stops being enough. When the thought of you is no longer something they can dismiss. Because the story does not conclude in silence. It unfolds inside it. That still phase you are living through right now has a psychological explanation. Once you grasp it, you stop turning it inward. When the relationship ends, your entire system sounds an alarm. You absorb the rupture, the loss, the craving for what was familiar. Your body responds as though something necessary for survival has been removed. That is because attachment and survival share the same neural architecture. Love is not only emotional, it is biological, it is structural, but in avoidant wiring, the structure developed differently. From an early point in life, the lesson was repeated enough times to become belief. Depending on others brings pain. So they fortified themselves. Self-reliance became identity. Emotional separation became a skill they practiced until it felt natural. So when a bond grows profound, their nervous system does not read it as warmth. It reads it as exposure. Exposure feels like risk. Risk feels like danger. When intimacy grows heavy, the instinct to escape activates automatically. That is why when separation occurs, their first internal response is not devastation. It is release. The emotional pressure dissolves. The demands fade. They feel air returning to their lungs. To you, that appears heartless. But inside their psychological architecture, it is a survival response switching on. Attachment researchers call this deactivating. It is a protective mechanism. The mind reduces the significance of the relationship to lower internal distress. It magnifies the problems. It catalogs the friction. It tells a story in which the connection was not that meaningful. This is not deliberate cruelty. It is self-defense. They are not calculating the cost of what they walked away from. They are asking one question: how do I stay intact? That distinction transforms the entire picture. While you are moving through grief, they are reinforcing barriers. While you are revisiting what was shared, they are crafting stories that make distance easier to justify. The ego becomes their collaborator. It tells them they are better positioned alone. It tells them strength means needing no one. It tells them this composure is growth. But what ego names as strength is frequently avoidance in formal clothing. The human mind is capable of postponing emotion indefinitely. It is incapable of erasing it. When feeling is pushed beneath the surface, the brain files it rather than resolves it. It becomes outstanding emotional debt. Consider how unaddressed pressure operates. When you ignore it, the body still carries it. It surfaces through tension, restlessness, low-grade anxiety. The same principle governs attachment. When love is suppressed rather than processed, it does not dissolve. It waits for an opening. In the beginning, they ensure no opening exists. Their calendar stays full. Their body stays in. Motion, goals, social noise, new attention, everything serves as insulation. Forward movement creates the sensation of strength. Stillness creates the sensation of threat. Because stillness allows truth to surface. You may be sitting with the question, if I genuinely mattered, why is there no signal? Here is the answer rooted in psychology. Signaling that something matters requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires a foundation of safety. And safety is precisely what avoidants have never been able to fully access. Admitting they miss you would require admitting they needed you. Needing someone collides head-on with the identity they spent years constructing. They have built themselves on the belief that self-sufficiency is survival, so they resist the admission. The mind can manufacture temporary insulation through external stimulation. New environments, new interactions, new energy. Dopamine can paper over sorrow for a period. But dopamine is short-lived. When stimulation recedes, the mind gravitates back toward what it never finished. That is where the fissures begin appearing. Not loudly, not visibly, quietly. A memory rises without invitation. A familiar pattern in someone else reminds them of you. A location carries a different weight without your presence. A conversation falls flat because it does not reach the depth they once had access to. These are small occurrences, but they stack. The nervous system cannot sustain escape posture indefinitely. Eventually, the body begins seeking equilibrium. Equilibrium requires acknowledgement of what was real. Absorb this fully. The delay is not a verdict on your value. It is a portrait of their coping mechanism. Attachment theory establishes that avoidants disconnect to regulate anxiety. They engineer emotional distance to maintain internal stability. Short-term, this functions. They appear composed, they feel in command, but extended suppression has consequences. Unfelt emotion does not diminish over time. It transforms into restlessness, into a vague hollowness, into a subtle awareness that something that carried weight is no longer present. When that awareness begins taking shape, it unsettles them. Because now the story they constructed starts developing gaps. If it was insignificant, why does it surface uninvited? If they genuinely move forward, why does a simple reminder alter their entire internal weather? The mind is uncomfortable with contradiction. When experience and narrative no longer align, pressure builds toward resolution. They may find themselves looking at your page not from strategy, but from a pull they cannot quite explain. They may find themselves wondering whether you are healing, whether you think of them, whether you have moved somewhere they cannot reach. Curiosity deepens into awareness. Awareness deepens into longing. Longing is foreign terrain for someone who organized their entire interior life around not needing. It challenges the architecture of their self-concept. Because longing is an admission that someone outside of them left something inside of them. Now they are experiencing precisely what they spent years engineering against: vulnerability without a lever to pull. There is no immediate exit, no reliable distraction that fully neutralizes it. It keeps returning, each time with a little more weight. They begin revisiting shared moments through a different lens, not defensively now, but honestly. They recall your steadiness during their uncertain periods. They recognize that you held space for them when they could not hold it for themselves. They understand, perhaps for the first time, that what you offered was not pressure, it was presence, and presence is rarer than they accounted for. This recognition does not arrive with pride. It arrives with something heavier: regret. Regret has a way of breaking through defenses that nothing else can penetrate. It asks a question they cannot dismiss. Did you release something that deserved to be held? That question settles into the chest. It does not leave easily. And this is the turning point. When the internal weight exceeds the fear of being emotionally exposed, something gives way. Not dramatically, not with a declaration. Quietly. They accept that the connection registered more deeply than they permitted themselves to acknowledge. They recognize that distance did not dissolve the bond. They understand that what they called freedom was actually postponement. That is when missing you becomes something more than a passing flicker. It becomes a presence. They may still resist the impulse to reach out. Pride can hold a wall upright for a long time, but the wall now has fractures. The story of complete detachment no longer holds its shape. Human psychology is unambiguous on this point. What we suppress does not weaken in the dark, it accumulates. When it finally breaks the surface, it does so with the full weight of everything that was deferred. Now they are sitting inside what they once ran from, and for the first time, they are feeling the actual dimensions of what is gone. This is not about watching someone struggle. It is not about vindication. It is about understanding how emotional timelines operate. Some people move through pain in real time. Others delay it until delay is no longer an option. But no one permanently bypasses the emotional consequence of genuine connection. While you were healing, they were deferring. The deferred has now arrived, and it lands heavier for having been postponed. This is the juncture where they finally understand your absence, not as an intellectual concept, as a felt reality, and felt reality is the only kind that genuinely transforms. And yet, here is what this entire arc ultimately reveals. This was never truly about them breaking. It was always about you rebuilding, because while they were wrestling with suppressed feeling, you were walking directly into the fire. You sat with the pain without flinching from it. You questioned your own worth in the dark and kept going anyway. You held your dignity on the nights when reaching out would have felt like relief, but would have cost you something you could not afford to lose. That is not surviving. That is becoming. Every evening you chose not to pursue. Every morning you chose not to explain yourself to someone who had stopped listening. Every time you absorbed the silence without letting it convince you that you were nothing, you were laying down something permanent inside yourself. Self-possession, the kind that does not require external confirmation to stand upright. And there is a psychological reality that most people overlook. When someone who once had full access to your energy senses, that the access has been withdrawn, not out of game playing but out of genuine self-respect, something fundamental shifts in their perception. The mind recalculates importance when availability contracts, not because you engineered it, but because you stopped making yourself smaller to accommodate their limitations. You stopped offering excess to someone operating at a deficit. You stopped constructing arguments for your own worth. You stopped positioning yourself as something they needed to be convinced to want. That withdrawal of effort is not passivity. It is the most active decision you can make. There is a specific quality to someone who has learned to carry their own weight without bitterness. It is not coldness. It is not performance. It is the settled energy of someone who has stopped outsourcing their sense of value. When you direct your attention back toward your own trajectory, something reorganizes around you. You recover focus that had been fragmenting. You restore patterns that had eroded. You invest in the relationships that give back what they take. You become someone whose presence is no longer contingent on being chosen. Here is the truth that takes the longest to believe, but changes everything once it does. Your significance did not diminish because someone lacked the capacity to recognize it. Worth is not determined by the person standing closest. What you brought to that relationship was real. That its depth exceeded what they could hold is a statement about their range, not your quality. And when this understanding moves from something you can articulate to something you actually feel, your presence changes. It becomes harder to dismiss. Not because you projected it outward, but because it stopped needing to be projected. It simply is. If they return, they will return to someone they do not entirely recognize. Not because you changed to provoke it, but because you changed because you had to. Because growth under pressure is not optional. It is what survival demands when survival means something more than just continuing. And if they do not return, you move forward, carrying something they will always lack. The knowledge of what it means to face your own interior honestly and keep going regardless. That is not a consolation. That is the entire point. The relationship was never the destination. It was the pressure that shaped the destination. You came through it. And what comes through pressure intact does not go back to what it was before. It goes forward as something that cannot be undone.